The cold wasn't what hurt. It was hearing laughter coming from inside my own house. On Christmas Eve, I stood on the front porch with one small suitcase and nowhere to go. At 72, I never imagined I'd become a stranger to my own family. The front door was locked, not accidentally. The locks had been changed. I knew because my old brass key wouldn't even fit anymore. An hour earlier, my son had looked me in the eyes and quietly said, "Dad, I think it's better if you spend Christmas somewhere else this year." No argument, no explanation, just those words. Then he closed the door. I kept telling myself there had to be a reason, because I hadn't raised a cruel son. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. Snow had started falling. I picked up my suitcase and slowly walked toward the sidewalk. Then, I heard someone calling my name. "Mr. Thomas Walker?" I turned around. A young woman, maybe 30 years old, stood beside a small blue car. She looked nervous, as though she'd been searching for me. "I've been trying to find you all day." I frowned. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" She smiled softly. "No, but your wife saved my life 20 years ago." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My wife, Eleanor, had been gone for 8 Christmases. I had never heard this woman's name before. She reached into her coat pocket and carefully pulled out a small glass Christmas ornament. Inside, I could see something folded tightly, a tiny piece of paper. She held it out to me. "Eleanor told me, if I ever found you, I was supposed to give you this." I stared at the ornament, because I recognized it immediately. It had hung on our Christmas tree every single year, until the Christmas after Eleanor died. Then, it simply disappeared. I always thought we'd lost it. I was wrong. I turned the ornament over in my hands. It was exactly as I remembered. Tiny red glass, a hand-painted snowflake, one small crack near the silver cap. Eleanor had accidentally dropped it on our first Christmas together. She refused to throw it away. She always said, "The things that survive being broken become the most valuable." For years, it had been the first ornament she placed on the tree. The year after she died, it disappeared. Neither my son nor I could ever find it, until now. "Open it," the young woman whispered. My hands trembled as I removed the tiny silver cap. A tightly folded piece of paper slid into my palm. I unfolded it carefully. It wasn't a letter. It was only one sentence, written in Eleanor's handwriting. "Please trust Claire." I looked up. "You're Claire?" She nodded. "I promised Eleanor I wouldn't come until the right Christmas." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" Claire took a slow breath. 20 years ago, I was living in my car. I was 19. I had no family, no money, and nowhere to spend Christmas." I said nothing. She continued. "Your wife found me sitting outside the grocery store. She invited me into your home. For one night, one Christmas dinner. That's all." A tear rolled down her cheek. "But that one night saved my life." I looked back toward my house. The lights were still glowing through the windows. I could see my son's shadow moving inside. He hadn't looked outside once. Not once. A part of me wanted to walk away forever. Another part wanted answers. Claire gently touched my arm. "Eleanor asked me to wait until this Christmas. She said, when the time came, your son would need you more than you realized." I stared at her. "What does my son have to do with any of this?" Claire looked toward the house, then quietly said, "Because your son didn't lock you out. He was following your wife's final Christmas wish." For several seconds, I simply stared at Claire. "That's impossible. My wife would have never asked our son to lock me out of my own house." Claire didn't argue. Instead, she reached into a purse and pulled out a small envelope. It was old. The edges had turned yellow. Across the front, written in Eleanor's handwriting, were 4 words. For Christmas, not before. My heart skipped. I'd seen that handwriting thousands of times. Birthday cards, anniversary notes, little reminders she'd leave beside the coffee maker. It was hers, without question. I opened the envelope. Inside was another note. Only 2 sentences. Thomas, before you judge our son, please give him 1 more hour. I read it twice, then a 3rd time. 1 more hour? Why? What could possibly happen in 1 hour that would explain any of this? Claire looked at her watch. It's 6:05. I frowned. So? Eleanor told me everything would make sense at 7. 7 o'clock, exactly 1 hour away. I looked back toward my house. The curtains were closed now. The lights were still on. I could hear faint Christmas music drifting through the walls. Inside, my family was celebrating. Outside, I was standing in the snow with a stranger. Nothing about this made sense. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me since she arrived. Claire, why did Eleanor trust you so much? Claire smiled through tears. Because she gave me something no one else ever had. A family. I wasn't invited to dinner that Christmas. I was adopted into your lives. I looked at her in surprise. She nodded. Not legally, but in every way that mattered. Just then, the front door of my house opened. My son stepped onto the porch. He looked around until he saw me standing beside Claire. For the first time that evening, he smiled. Not with relief, with gratitude. Then he quietly said, "Dad, it's time." I looked at my son, then at Claire, then back at the house. Nothing about tonight made sense. Still, I followed him. When I stepped through the front door, everyone inside stopped talking. The Christmas tree glowed in the corner. The smell of cinnamon filled the room. My grandchildren ran toward me, then suddenly stopped, almost as if they'd been told to wait. My son walked to the fireplace. Without saying a word, he picked up an old wooden box. I hadn't seen it in years. It belonged to Eleanor. She kept family photographs, old Christmas cards, and little keepsakes inside. He placed it gently into my hands. "Dad, Mom wanted you to open this only after Claire came home." My hands shook. Inside the box lay dozens of Christmas cards, one for every year since Eleanor passed away. Every envelope had a different year written on it: 2019, 2020, 2021, all the way to 2026. The one marked 2026 was missing. I looked at my son. "Where is this year's letter?" He smiled. "You already read it." I frowned. "What?" The note inside the ornament was this year's Christmas letter. I couldn't believe it. For 8 years, my wife had somehow planned every Christmas after she was gone. Every year, my son opened one letter, followed one simple instruction. Sometimes it was, "Take your father fishing." Sometimes, "Cook his favorite dinner." Sometimes, "Tell him a story that makes him laugh." Little things, small acts of love. Until this year. This year's instruction was different. Claire quietly wiped away a tear. "Eleanor told your son that this Christmas, my family should finally come home." I looked toward the dining room. Only then did I notice 3 people standing quietly near the table. A man, 2 little girls. Claire smiled. My husband and our daughters. She looked around the room, then whispered, "I've dreamed about this Christmas for 20 years. I turned to my son. "So, You didn't lock me out because you didn't want me here." He shook his head, his eyes filled with tears. "No, Dad. I locked the door because Mom said your first step into this house had to be with the family she spent 20 years trying to bring together." For the first time that night, I understood. I hadn't been left outside. I had been waited for. No one spoke, not for a long time. The only sound in the room was the soft crackle of the fireplace. I looked around the house, at my son, at Claire, at her husband, at the two little girls standing shyly behind her. Then I looked at the empty chair beside the Christmas tree, the chair where Eleanor always sat. For just a second, it almost felt like she was still there, smiling, watching all of us. My son gently took my hand. "Dad, there's one more thing." He reached beneath the Christmas tree and picked up a small wrapped box. "I've kept this for 8 years. It was Mom's last gift. For you." My hands trembled as I removed the ribbon. Inside was an old family photograph, one I'd never seen before. It had been taken 20 Christmases earlier. There I was, standing beside Eleanor, and between us stood 19-year-old Claire, wrapped in Eleanor's old winter coat, smiling like she had finally found somewhere she belonged. I turned the photo over. On the back, Eleanor had written just one sentence. "Family isn't always born. Sometimes it's welcomed." I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. For years, I'd believed Christmas was about holding on to the people you'd lost. Eleanor had spent her final Christmas teaching us something completely different. Christmas is about making room for someone who thinks they've been forgotten. I walked across the room, stopped in front of Claire. Then, without saying a word, I hugged her, the same way I would have hugged my own daughter. She began crying immediately. "I've missed this family, every Christmas." I smiled. "You don't have to miss us anymore. You're already home." That evening, our dining table felt smaller than ever, not because it had shrunk, because there were more people around it than ever before. My grandchildren laughed with Claire's daughters. My son carved the turkey. Someone accidentally burned the rolls, exactly the way Eleanor always did. For the first time since losing her, Christmas didn't feel empty. It felt complete. Before dinner, I quietly hung one ornament on the tree, the little red ornament Claire had carried for 20 years, right where Eleanor always placed it, at the very front, where everyone could see it. Because some decorations aren't valuable because they're beautiful. They're valuable because they remind us that one act of kindness can become someone else's family. Before I go, can I ask you something? Has someone who's not related by blood ever changed your life like family? I'd genuinely love to read your story in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, I hope you'll join us for another one next week. Merry Christmas, and God bless you.